The wind howled like a wounded animal across the Wyoming plains, carrying with it the bitter promise of another unforgiving winter. Clara Mitchell pressed her palm against the frosted window of her ramshackle cabin, watching the snow swirl in violent eddies outside, 7 months heavy with child. She moved with the careful deliberation of one who had learned that every step cost more than it should. The cabin groaned under the assault of the wind, its thin walls offering little more protection than a prayer. Thomas had built it hastily last spring, promising her a proper house come summer. But Thomas was 3 months in the ground now, crushed beneath 1,000 pounds of rock in the Sweetwater mine, leaving her with nothing but debt and the growing life within her belly. Clara turned from the window, her breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. The fire in the hearth had dwindled to glowing embers, and she knew she'd need to venture out for more wood soon. The pile Thomas had split was nearly gone, consumed by the endless hunger of winter. Her stomach cramped, not from the child, but from hunger. The cornmeal was down to dust in the bottom of the sack. The last of the salt pork had been stretched into a thin broth 2 days ago, and the jar of preserves sat empty on the shelf, scraped clean. She wrapped her worn shawl tighter around her shoulders and sat carefully in the rocking chair Thomas had traded for last summer. The runners creaked against the rough floorboards as she swayed, one hand resting on her swollen belly. The baby stirred, a flutter of movement that should have brought comfort but only reminded her of another mouth she'd soon need to feed. The walk to town was 2 miles through snow that could swallow a woman whole if she wasn't careful. But what choice did she have? Mr. Henderson at the general store had extended credit once before. Perhaps he would again. Clara rose with effort, donning her heaviest dress, still too thin for the weather, and Thomas's old coat that hung loose on her frame. She wrapped rags around her worn boots, knowing they'd be soaked through before she reached town, but hoping they'd provide some protection against the cold. The journey took nearly 2 hours. By the time the scattered buildings of Cedar Ridge came into view, Clara could no longer feel her feet. The town huddled against the base of the mountains like a collection of broken teeth, weathered and gap-toothed, beaten down by wind and hardship. Main Street was nearly deserted. A few horses stood tethered outside the saloon, their heads low against the wind. Smoke rose from chimneys. Speaking of warmth and comfort behind closed doors, comfort that felt as distant as the stars. Clara paused outside Henderson's general store, steadying herself against a post. Through the window, she could see Mrs. Henderson behind the counter, her pinched face bent over a ledger. Clara knew that face would pinch tighter when she walked in. The bell above the door announced her arrival with a mocking chime, "Mrs." Henderson looked up, and her expression confirmed Clara's fears. "Mrs. Mitchell." The greeting was as cold as the wind outside. "Good morning. Mrs. Henderson." Clara kept her chin high, though she could feel the other woman's gaze cataloging every patch on her dress, every worn spot on her coat. "I was hoping to speak with Mr. Henderson about—" "He's not here." Mrs. Henderson's words cut sharp as shears. "Gone to Cheyenne for supplies. Won't be back for a week." Clara's heart sank, but she pressed on. "Perhaps you could help me. I need just a few things. Cornmeal, some salt pork if you have it. I can pay when—" "When what?" Mrs. Henderson closed the ledger with a snap. "When your husband rises from the dead. When that mine starts paying out to widows." She shook her head, gray curls bobbing beneath her cap. "You already owe us $12, Mrs. Mitchell. My husband may be soft-hearted, but I run a business, not a charity." Heat flooded Clara's cheeks despite the cold. Around her, the store's bounty seemed to mock her. Sacks of flour, wheels of cheese, jars of preserves lined up like soldiers. The smell of smoked meat made her stomach clench. "I understand," Clara said quietly. "But surely, in my condition—" "Your condition is no concern of mine, Mrs." Henderson's eyes dropped pointedly to Clara's belly. "You should have thought of that before." "Well, there's the church charity if you're truly desperate. though I imagine they'll have questions about a woman in your situation." The implication hung in the air like smoke. Clara had heard the whispers, knew what some people thought, that Thomas had been dead longer than 3 months, that perhaps the child wasn't his at all. The cruelty of it made her throat tight. "I don't need charity," Clara said, the words coming out harder than she intended. "I'll manage on my own." "Mrs." Henderson sniffed. "See that you do, and don't come back here until you can pay what you owe." Clara turned and left, the bells chime following her like laughter. Outside, the wind had picked up, driving snow in horizontal sheets. She pulled the coat tighter and began the long walk home. She made it halfway before the tears came, hot against her frozen cheeks. Pride was a luxury she couldn't afford, but it was all she had left. "I'll starve before I beg," she whispered to the empty plains, the words snatched away by the wind. By the time she reached the cabin, Clara could barely push open the door against the building drift. Inside, the fire had died completely, leaving the small space as cold as a tomb. She sank into the rocking chair without removing her coat, too exhausted to care about the snow melting into puddles around her feet. The baby moved again, a rolling sensation that brought fresh tears. "I'm sorry," she whispered, pressing both hands to her belly. "I'm so sorry." Night fell early in winter, and with it came the wolves. Clara could hear them in the distance, their howls carrying on the wind. They sounded hungry too. She forced herself to rise, to kindle a new fire with the last few pieces of wood. Tomorrow she'd have to venture into the forest, pregnant or not. The thought terrified her. The woods were no place for a woman alone, especially in winter. But freezing to death was just as certain as starving. As she sat watching the meager flames, Clara thought of Thomas. Not the Thomas who'd died in the mine, but the one who'd courted her back in Ohio, full of dreams about the fortune waiting in the West. He'd painted pictures with his words. A proper house, land of their own, a future bright as polished gold. Instead, she had this, a drafty cabin, an empty belly, and a town that had already written her off as another sad story of the frontier. Women like her disappeared all the time out here, swallowed by winter or hardship or simple despair. Their names were forgotten as quickly as snow covered their graves. But as Clara sat in the gathering darkness, feeling the life move within her, something hard and stubborn crystallized in her chest. She'd survive this night, and the next, and the one after that. Not for pride. Pride was a luxury now, but for the child who had no choice in any of this. Tomorrow she'd search for wood. Maybe she'd find some small game, though she'd never hunted before. The roots she'd noticed last fall might still be findable beneath the snow. And if worse came to worst, no. She pushed the thought away. There were still options before begging, before throwing herself on the mercy of people who'd already shown they had none to spare. She'd eat bark before she'd crawl to that church, endure their sermons about fallen women and the wages of sin. The fire popped, sending up a shower of sparks. Outside, the storm was building into something monstrous, rattling the windows and searching for cracks in the walls. Clara closed her eyes and began to rock slowly, humming a lullaby her mother had sung years ago. When the world had been kinder, "I'll starve before I beg," she said again, making it a promise, a prayer, a battle cry against the darkness gathering both outside and within. The words felt like the only warmth left to her, the last ember of the woman she'd been before Thomas died, before the town turned its back, before winter showed its teeth. In the corner, snow began to seep through a gap in the wall. Clara watched it with dull eyes, too tired to stuff it with rags tonight. Tomorrow. Everything would have to wait for tomorrow, if tomorrow came at all. The morning came wrapped in silence, the kind that only follows a brutal storm. Clara woke to find frost coating the inside of the windows and her breath hanging in the air like a ghost. The fire had died again in the night, and she knew with grim certainty that she had no choice now. She must venture into the woods or freeze. She dressed in layers, every piece of clothing she owned, until movement became difficult. Thomas's hunting knife went into her belt, though she had little idea how to use it for anything beyond cutting rope, a burlap sack for kindling, the axe that felt too heavy in her hands, and desperation sharp as any blade. These were her tools for survival. The forest edge lay a quarter-mile from the cabin, a dark line of pines that seemed to watch her approach with ancient indifference. The snow was deep here, unmarked by any trail. Each step was a battle, her swollen body making balance precarious. More than once she had to stop, hand pressed to her side where the baby seemed to protest this foolish venture. An hour into the woods, Clara realized her mistake. The trees all looked the same, heavy with snow, and she'd been too focused on finding dead wood to mark her path. Panic fluttered in her chest like a trapped bird. She forced it down, forced herself to think. The sun, weak as it was, still showed direction. She could find her way back, but first, wood. She spotted a fallen pine, partially sheltered from the snow. The branches would burn, if she could break them free. Clara set to work with the axe, each swing jarring through her entire body. Sweat froze on her skin even as she labored, and her hands, already numb, struggled to keep their grip. She never heard him approach. One moment she was alone with her labor and desperation. The next, a shadow fell across the snow, and Clara spun, nearly losing her footing. The axe raised in clumsy defense. The man stood 10 feet away, still as the trees around him. Tall, taller than Thomas had been, with shoulders broad enough to block the weak sun. A full beard, dark shot with gray, covered the lower half of his face, but it was his eyes that held her. Deep brown, watchful, revealing nothing. He wore furs and leather, clothes that belonged to this place in a way Clara's threadbare dress and borrowed coat never could. A rifle rested easy in his hands, though it wasn't pointed at her. Still, Clara kept the axe raised, her arms trembling with the effort. "You're going to hurt yourself." His voice was rough, like he hadn't used it in a while. "Or the baby." Clara's grip tightened on the axe handle. "Stay back." He didn't move, just studied her with those dark eyes. "You're the widow from the cabin down by Elk Creek." It wasn't a question. Clara said nothing, trying to steady her breathing. The baby chose that moment to shift, sending a sharp pain across her middle. She couldn't help the small gasp that escaped. "You need to sit down," the man said. "You're white as bone." "I'm fine." But even as she said it, Clara felt the world tilt. The axe slipped from her numb fingers, and her knees buckled. The snow rushed up to meet her. Strong hands caught her before she hit the ground. Clara tried to pull away, but she had no strength left. The world grayed at the edges, and the last thing she heard was that rough voice saying something about stubborn fools and frozen creeks. She woke to warmth, real warmth, not the memory of it. For a moment, Clara lay still, afraid to open her eyes and find it all a dream. But the crackle of a fire was real, the smell of wood smoke and something else, food, definitely real. Memory crashed back, and her eyes flew open. She was lying on a bed of furs near a stone fireplace. The walls around her were log, chinked tight against the wind. Lanterns hung from the beams, casting golden light over a space that was rough but clean, and warm, blessedly, impossibly warm. "You're awake." Clara turned her head to find the man sitting in a chair near the fire, cleaning a rifle with practiced movements. Up close, she could see more of him. The lines around his eyes spoke of years squinting into sun and snow. His hands, working the gun with unconscious skill, were scarred across the knuckles. When he looked at her, something flickered in his expression. Concern? Wariness? "Where am I?" Her voice came out cracked. "My place, about 2 miles up the mountain from where you decided to take a nap in the snow?" He set the rifle aside, rising to pour something from a pot hanging near the fire. "You need to eat." The smell hit her. Corn porridge, with what might have been actual butter melting on top. Clara's stomach cramped with want, but pride reared its head. "I can't pay you." "Didn't ask you to." He brought the bowl over, setting it on a rough table beside the bed. "But you'll eat, or you'll answer to me for what happens to that baby." The threat in his words was oddly gentle, more exasperation than menace. Clara struggled to sit up, hampered by the heavy furs and her own unwieldy body. Without asking, he helped her, his hands careful but impersonal. This close. She caught his scent, leather and pine smoke, the wild smell of the mountains. "I don't even know your name," she said. Elias Tanner." He stepped back once she was settled. "And you're Clara Mitchell. Whole Mountain knows about the widow in the Elk Creek cabin." Heat flooded her cheeks. "What else does the whole mountain know?" Elias shrugged, returning to his chair. "That you're too proud for your own good. That the town's decided you're their business to gossip about, but not to help." His eyes met hers. "That you were out there today looking for wood with an axe you can barely lift." Clara looked down at the bowl in her hands. The porridge was thick, rich, better than anything she'd tasted in months. It took everything she had not to wolf it down. "I manage." "Sure you do. That's why I found you face down in a snowdrift." She had no answer for that, so she ate. The warmth of the food spread through her like spring thaw. Around her, she began to notice more of the cabin. It was larger than hers. 2 rooms at least, pelts hung on the walls. Wolf, bear, elk, tools arranged with military precision. Everything spoke of a man who lived by his own hands, who needed no one and asked for nothing. "Why?" she asked finally. Elias was back to cleaning his rifle. "Why what? Why help me? You don't know me." He was quiet long enough that Clara thought he wouldn't answer. When he did speak, his voice was lower, rougher. "Maybe because I know what it's like to be alone in the cold." There was a story there. Clara could feel it, but she was a guest, an uninvited one at that, and had no right to pry. She finished the porridge, fighting the urge to lick the bowl clean. "Storm's picking up again," Elias said, not looking at her. "You'll stay tonight. Tomorrow, if it clears, I'll take you home." "I can't." "You can, and you will." He stood, hanging the rifle on pegs above the fireplace. "Unless you want to explain to that baby why you were too proud to accept one night's shelter." Clara wanted to argue, but exhaustion was pulling at her again. The warmth, the food, the safety. They were drugging her better than any medicine. "Just tonight," she murmured. "Just tonight." He agreed. But when she woke hours later, the storm was howling worse than before. Through the single window, she could see nothing but white. Elias was cooking something that smelled like heaven, rabbit, maybe with wild onions. How long was I asleep? Most of the day. He didn't turn from the fire. Storm's not letting up, might be stuck here a while. Clara's heart sank. Every hour here was another hour for talk to spread, for her reputation to sink lower. A pregnant widow alone with a strange man. She could already hear the whispers. "I have to go back." "In this?" Elias gestured toward the window. "You wouldn't make it 20 feet. He was right. Clara knew he was right, but knowing didn't make it easier to accept. She watched him work, noting the economy of his movements, the quiet confidence. There was something military in his bearing. Despite the mountain man clothes, "You were a soldier," she said. It wasn't a question. His hands stilled for just a moment. "Once." "Which side? Does it matter now?" He turned, and she saw the old pain in his eyes. "War's over. We all lost something." He brought her a plate, rabbit stew, with actual vegetables. Clara ate slowly this time, savoring each bite. The cabin creaked under the wind's assault, but the walls held firm. Safe. She was safe. "Tell me about the baby's father." The question surprised her. Clara set down her spoon, considering. He was full of dreams, always talking about the fortune just waiting to be pulled from the ground. He was going to build me a fine house, buy me silk dresses. She smiled sadly. He died, still believing it was just one more day, one more blast away. "Mining's a hard death," Elias said quietly. "Any death out here is hard." Clara touched her belly. "He never even knew about the baby. I found out the week after we buried him." They sat in companionable silence after that. the fire popping and the wind howling its fury. Clara found herself studying him when he wasn't looking. The scar that ran through his left eyebrow, the way he favored his right shoulder, the careful way he moved, like a man who'd learned not to trust the world to be kind. When it came time to sleep, he gave her the bed, a real bed with a mattress, not the straw tick she was used to. He took a bedroll by the fire, placing himself between her and the door. Protection or propriety? Clara wasn't sure. Maybe both. "Elias?" she called softly in the darkness. "Yeah? Thank you." He was quiet for a long moment. "Get some sleep. Clara, tomorrow will come whether we're ready or not." But tomorrow brought no relief. If anything, the storm had worsened. And the day after that was the same. 3 days trapped in the cabin on the mountain. 3 days of Elias's quiet kindness and careful distance. 3 days of eating regular meals and sleeping warm and safe. By the 4th day, when the storm finally broke, Clara almost didn't want to leave. The 4th morning dawned clear and bitter cold, the kind of day when the air itself seemed to crystallize. Clara stood at the window, watching the sun turn the snow-covered peaks rose and gold. Behind her, she could hear Elias moving about, preparing breakfast as he had each morning of her stay. "I should go back today," she said, though the words felt like stones in her throat. "After breakfast." His voice was matter-of-fact, but Clara had learned to read the subtle currents beneath his calm exterior. No sense heading out on an empty stomach. They ate in what had become comfortable silence, venison and biscuits, with coffee stronger than anything she'd had since leaving Ohio. Clara tried not to think about returning to her cold cabin, to cornmeal and water, to counting each stick of firewood like a miser counting coins. "I'll teach you to set snares before you go," Elias said suddenly. "Rabbits run regular paths in winter. Easy enough to catch if you know how." Clara looked up, surprised. "You do that?" He shrugged, but she caught the flicker of something in his eyes. "Can't have you wandering the woods with an axe again, liable to hurt yourself or scare all the game to the next county." After breakfast, he led her outside to a small clearing near the cabin. The snow was pristine, marked only by the delicate tracks of small animals. Elias knelt, showing her how to identify rabbit runs, how to bend saplings just so, how to fashion a snare from wire. "The trick is thinking like prey," he said, his hands sure and gentle as he demonstrated. "They want cover, easy paths, safety. You find where they feel safe. That's where you set your trap." Clara watched, memorizing each movement. When he had her try it herself, her cold, stiffened fingers fumbled with the wire. Without comment, Elias moved behind her, his larger hands guiding hers through the motions. For a moment, sheltered by his warmth, Clara forgot about propriety, about what anyone would think. There was only the lesson, the patience of his teaching, the strange comfort of not being alone. "There," he said, stepping back. "Check it each morning. Reset if it's been sprung empty. You'll have meat through the winter." They set 3 more snares together, Elias pointing out signs she would have missed, a tuft of fur on bark, pellets nearly covered by snow, the subtle highways of survival written in a language she was only beginning to understand. Back in the cabin, he gathered supplies, salt pork wrapped in cloth, a sack of cornmeal, dried beans, even precious coffee. Clara watched with growing alarm as the pile grew. "I can't take all this. You can and you will." His tone brooked no argument. "Call it payment for the lesson if it makes you feel better. One snaring lesson isn't worth? Then I'll teach you more." He turned to face her fully. How to read weather signs. How to find water when the creek freezes. How to bank a fire so it lasts the night. Your pride won't keep that baby warm. Clara. The use of her name, soft in his rough voice, made something flutter in her chest. She looked away, unsettled by the feeling. "Why do you care what happens to us?" Elias was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of old grief. "Had a wife once, Sarah, sweet little thing from back east. Like you. Brought her out to Colorado territory after the war. Told her we'd make a new life. away from all the blood and burning. He moved to the window, staring out at the mountains. Didn't know anything about frontier living, but Lord, she tried. Too proud to admit when she was scared or hungry. Too stubborn to ask for help. His hand rose to touch something at his chest. A locket, Clara realized. Lost her and the baby both in our second winter. Fever took them while I was gone hunting. The cabin felt smaller suddenly, filled with ghosts. Clara's hand went instinctively to her own belly. "I'm sorry. Long time ago?" But the pain in his voice said otherwise. "Point is, I know pride. Know what it costs. Won't watch it happen again if I can help it." They prepared to leave after that, the morning stretching toward noon. Elias packed the supplies onto a makeshift sled, added blankets and a small hatchet that would be easier for her to handle than the axe. When Clara emerged from the cabin, he was adjusting straps on a pair of snowshoes. "These were Sarah's," he said gruffly. "No use to anyone sitting in storage. Your feet look about the right size." Clara accepted them with hands that trembled slightly. The leather was well maintained, cared for even years after its owner's death. "Thank you." The journey down the mountain was easier than the climb up had been, though Clara suspected that had more to do with Elias breaking trail than any improvement in conditions. He moved through the forest like he was part of it, reading signs in broken branches and wind patterns that remained mysterious to her. Halfway down, they stopped to rest on a fallen log. Clara's back ached, and the baby seemed restless. Turning and kicking, she tried to hide her discomfort, but Elias noticed. He seemed to notice everything. "When's the baby due?" 2 months, maybe less." Clara shifted, trying to find a comfortable position. "The midwife in town said first babies sometimes come early. You'll need help when the time comes." "I'll manage." The words came out automatically, and she saw his jaw tighten. "Like you managed the firewood?" Heat flooded her cheeks. "That's different." "Is it?" He stood, offering her a hand up. "Pride's a cold comfort when you're bleeding out alone." The blunt words should have offended her, but Clara heard the fear beneath them, the echo of old loss. She took his hand, letting him help her to her feet. "The midwife will come, if I can pay her." Elias said nothing, but his expression was eloquent. They both knew Mrs. Hartley's reputation. She'd come, but only for cash in hand. Credit was for the living, not for widows who might not survive childbirth. They reached her cabin as the sun touched the mountain peaks. Clara's heart sank at the sight of it, so small, so cold, already half buried in new snow. Ice had formed around the door, and one shutter hung crooked, banging in the wind. Without a word, Elias set about making repairs. He rehung the shutter, cleared the ice, checked the chimney for blockages. Inside, he built up the fire while Clara unpacked the supplies he'd given her. Each item a small miracle. Salt for preserving, lard for cooking, even a small packet of tea. "I'll come back in a few days," he said when the cabin was warm again. "Check those snares. Make sure you're remembering right. You don't have to." "I know what I have to do." He paused at the door, silhouetted against the dying light. "What I choose to do is different." After he left, Clara sat in a rocking chair, staring at the supplies stacked on her table. The cabin felt different somehow. Still small, still poor, but no longer quite so hopeless. She could survive a few more days, and then a few more after that. That night, she made a proper meal for the first time in weeks, as she ate. Clara found herself thinking about Elias's hands guiding hers on the snare wire, about the quiet pain in his voice when he spoke of his wife, about the way he'd said her name, like it mattered. Outside, wolves howled in the darkness, but for once, they didn't sound quite so close. The next morning, Clara checked the snares as Elias had taught her. The first 2 were empty, but the third held a fat rabbit, frozen stiff in the cold. She stared at it, this small victory against starvation, and felt tears prick her eyes. She reset the snare carefully, whispering a thank you to the rabbit's spirit as her grandmother had taught her long ago. Death feeding life. It was the way of things out here. Brutal, but honest. Over the following days, Clara fell into a rhythm. Check the snares at first light, gather what wood she could manage, tend the fire carefully, banking it as Elias had shown her. The supplies he'd left stretched further than they should have, seasoned by hope instead of desperation. On the 5th day, as promised, Elias returned. Clara saw him coming across the snow and had coffee ready when he knocked. He entered bringing the cold with him, but also something else, a haunch of venison, fresh killed. Your snares working? 2 rabbits so far. She couldn't keep the pride from her voice. Good. He set the meat on the table. This'll keep you in stew for a week or more. I'll show you how to smoke what you can't use right away. They worked together through the afternoon, Elias teaching her how to cut the meat properly, how to build a smoking frame, how to judge when the preservation was complete. His presence filled the small cabin, made it feel warmer somehow. As the sun set, painting the snow crimson, Clara made a decision. Stay for supper. It's the least I can do. He hesitated, and she saw the war in his eyes. Propriety against loneliness, wisdom against want. Just supper, he said finally. But as they sat across from each other at her small table, sharing rabbit stew and conversation, Clara knew that something had shifted. The careful distance Elias maintained was still there, but beneath it ran a current of possibility, fragile as spring ice. When he left that night, promising to return in a few days, Clara stood in the doorway, watching until he disappeared into the darkness. Her hand rested on her belly, feeling the baby turn and stretch. "We're going to be all right," she whispered. And for the first time since Thomas died, she almost believed it. The thaw came early that year, turning the roads to mud and making the journey to town even more treacherous. Clara stood at her door, watching the water drip from icicles, knowing she had no choice. The supplies Elias had given her were running low, and she needed salt for preserving the rabbits she'd caught. More importantly, she needed to face the town eventually. Hiding would only make the whispers worse. She dressed carefully, choosing her least patched dress and pinning her hair as neatly as her swollen fingers would allow. The walk took longer now, her body heavy and awkward with the baby so close to term. By the time she reached Cedar Ridge's main street, her back screamed and her feet had swollen inside her boots. The town seemed busier than usual. Men clustered outside the land office, and she caught fragments of excited conversation about new claims, fresh strikes. Clara kept her head high, though she felt every eye tracking her progress down the muddy street. At Henderson's general store, she paused. Through the window, she could see Mr. Henderson at the counter, his weathered face kind where his wife's had been sharp. Clara took a breath and entered. "Mrs. Mitchell." His greeting was warm, though she caught the flash of surprise in his eyes. "Haven't seen you in a while." "Mr. Henderson." She approached the counter, pulling out the few coins she'd hoarded. "I need salt, please, and thread if you have it." He fetched her items without comment, but when she placed her meager coins on the counter, he shook his head. "That's not enough, I'm afraid, with what you already owe." Clara's cheeks burned. "I understand. I'll just take what these will cover." "Now hold on." Mr. Henderson glanced toward the back room where his wife kept the accounts. "Maybe we can work something out. You still have that land Thomas claimed?" "Yes." Clara's hand tightened on her small purse. "But I'm not selling. Not asking you to. But there's been men asking about claims in that area. Seems there might be silver traces in those hills. You could lease the mineral rights. Keep the land itself." Before Clara could respond, the bell above the door chimed. She turned to see 3 men enter. Strangers. By their clothes, too new and clean for locals. One of them, a thin man with pale eyes, noticed her immediately. Well, you must be the widow Mitchell." His smile was all teeth, no warmth. "Josiah Crane. I represent Eastern mining interests." Clara stepped back instinctively. "I'm not interested in selling." "Who said anything about selling?" Crane moved closer, and Clara smelled bay rum and cigars. "A woman in your delicate condition." surely could use some financial security. We could make you a very generous offer for the mineral rights alone." The lady said she's not interested. The voice came from the doorway. Elias stood there, seeming to fill the frame, his rifle casual in his hands. His eyes were on Crane, dark and dangerous. "This is a private conversation," Crane said, though Clara noticed he took a step back. "Nothing's private in a store." Elias moved inside, positioning himself between Clara and the men. "Mrs. Mitchell, you ready to go?" Clara found her voice. "Yes, Mr. Henderson. I'll come back for those supplies another time." "No need." Elias pulled out money, setting it on the counter. "Add it to my account, and throw in some of that peppermint tea your wife stocks." "Mr." Henderson nodded quickly, gathering Clara's items and adding the tea. The tension in the store was thick as molasses. Crane's pale eyes darted between Elias and Clara, calculating. "I'll be staying at the hotel for a few days. Mrs. Mitchell," he said finally, "when you're ready to discuss your future, you can find me there." Elias picked up Clara's supplies. "Let's go." Outside, Clara had to hurry to keep up with his long strides. He didn't speak until they were past the main street, heading toward the edge of town. "You shouldn't have done that," she said. "Paid for my supplies." "You planning to do business with those vultures?" "Of course not, but—" Clara stopped as a sharp pain lanced across her middle. She pressed a hand to her side, breathing carefully. Elias was beside her instantly. "The baby?" "No, I don't think so. Just, I need to rest a moment." He guided her to a bench outside the church, setting down the supplies. Clara sank onto it gratefully, trying to ease the ache in her back. The baby seemed agitated, moving constantly. "Those men," Elias said, his voice low. "They're not the first to come sniffing around. Won't be the last either. Word's out about possible silver in those hills. Thomas always said there might be." Clara rubbed her belly, trying to soothe the restless child. "He died believing it. Men die believing a lot of things out here." Elias sat beside her, maintaining a careful distance. "Question is, what are you going to do about it?" Clara watched the townspeople passing by, saw the way they looked at her, some with pity, others with judgment, a few with the calculating gaze of those who smelled opportunity. "I won't sell. That land is all this baby will have of its father. Might not be your choice. Men like Crane have ways of getting what they want. Legal ways, if you're lucky. Other ways if you're not." They sat in silence for a moment. The church bells rang the hour, and Clara realized how late it had gotten. She needed to get home before dark, as if reading her thoughts. Elias stood. "I brought the wagon. Figured you might need it." She looked up at him, this man who kept appearing when she needed help most. "Why? Why do you keep—" "Already told you why." His voice was gruff. "Come on, let's get you home." The wagon was a blessing. Clara hadn't realized how exhausted she was until she didn't have to walk. Elias drove in silence, but she felt his awareness of her. The way he slowed for every bump, took the smoothest path possible. At her cabin, he helped her down, his hands steady and impersonal, but when she swayed slightly, he kept hold of her elbow. "You need to be careful. Baby's close now. Still have a few weeks." But even as she said it, Clara felt another twinge. She'd been having them all day. She realized, not regular, not painful enough to be real labor, but something. Elias carried her supplies inside, built up the fire. When he turned to leave, Clara found herself speaking without planning to. "Stay for supper?" He hesitated at the door. She could see the war in his face again, duty against desire, wisdom against loneliness. "It's getting dark," she added. "And I'd like to know more about these men. What they might do." It was an excuse, and they both knew it. But it was enough. Elias nodded, setting his rifle by the door. Clara busied herself with cooking, grateful for the distraction. The familiar rhythm of preparing food soothed her nerves, made the twinges in her belly seem less ominous. Elias sat at the table, watching her work, Crane's outfit has been buying up claims all along the range, he said. Some folks sold willing, others found themselves in sudden debt or had accidents that made them eager to leave. You think they're dangerous? I think they're businessmen. Sometimes that's worse than dangerous. He accepted the coffee she poured. You need to be ready. They won't give up easy if they think there's silver. Clara served the simple meal, beans and salt pork, biscuits she'd made that morning. As they ate, she found herself studying Elias in the lamplight, the silver threading through his dark hair, the way his hands, so capable of violence, could be so gentle. Tell me about the war, she said suddenly. He stilled, fork halfway to his mouth. Not much to tell. You were an officer. It wasn't a question. Everything about him spoke of command, of a man used to being obeyed. Captain, 3rd Colorado Cavalry. He set down his fork. Fought at Glorieta Pass, Sand Creek, too. Clara knew those names. Everyone did. Glorieta Pass. The battle that saved the West for the Union. Sand Creek. That was different. That was something people didn't talk about. After Sarah died, I came up here. His voice was distant. Figured the mountains didn't care what a man had done, what he'd seen. Do you regret it? The war? Regret's too simple a word. Elias met her eyes. I did what I thought was right at the time. Found out later that right and wrong aren't as clear as they tell you. Men do things in war, things that follow them home. Clara thought of Thomas, of his dreams that had led them here, of choices that seemed clear until they weren't. We all have things that follow us, some more than others. He stood abruptly. I should go. You need rest. But as he reached for his rifle, Clara gasped. This pain was different, deep, encompassing, stealing her breath. Liquid warmth spread down her legs. Oh, she gripped the table edge. Oh no, not yet. Elias was beside her in an instant. The baby? I think, yes. Another pain rolled through her. Too soon. It was too soon. The midwife, Mrs. Hartley, in town. No time. Elias's voice was calm, but she saw the fear flash in his eyes. Come on, let's get you to bed. He half carried her to the small bedroom, settling her gently. Clara gripped his hand as another pain built. You have to go. It's not proper. You can't. I'm not leaving you. His voice brooked no argument. I've delivered foals, calves, even helped with a baby once, during the war. We'll manage. This is different. This is... The pain stole her words. This is life coming into the world? Nothing more natural than that? He squeezed her hand. Now, tell me what you need. Through the night. Clara would remember his steady presence, the way he never flinched, never showed the fear she glimpsed in his eyes. He boiled water, found clean cloth, spoke to her in that rough, gentle voice when the pains grew unbearable. Sarah, she gasped during one terrible contraction. Were you with her when... No, the word was heavy with old grief. I was gone. Always gone when she needed me most. You're here now? Yes, he said simply. I'm here now. The baby came with the dawn, as if waiting for the light. A girl, small but fierce. Her first cries strong and angry at the cold world she'd entered. Elias placed her in Clara's arms with hands that shook slightly. She's perfect, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Clara looked down at her daughter, Thomas's daughter, who would never know him. Then she looked up at Elias, this man who'd been a stranger just weeks ago. Thank you, she whispered. He touched the baby's head gently, just once. What will you call her? Clara thought of the night just past, of fear transformed into joy, of a man who'd stayed when he could have gone. Hope, she said. Her name is Hope. The week following Hope's birth passed in a blur of exhaustion and wonder. Elias had stayed that first day, making sure Clara could manage, teaching her how to swaddle the baby properly, bringing in wood and water. But as soon as she was stable, he'd retreated to his mountain, leaving her with supplies and a promise to check on them soon. Clara understood. The proprieties had been shattered by necessity during Hope's birth. But now, with the crisis past, those same rules reasserted themselves. An unmarried man couldn't linger in a widow's home, not without destroying what little reputation she had left. She was changing Hope's wrapping when she heard the horses, multiple horses, moving fast. Clara's heart hammered as she peered through the window. 5 men dismounted in her yard, Josiah Crane and 4 others she didn't recognize. Hard-looking men with guns worn low and easy. Clara quickly placed Hope in her cradle and checked that Thomas's old shotgun was loaded. She barely had time to position herself by the door before Crane knocked, a perfunctory rap that spoke of a man used to entering wherever he pleased. "Mrs. Mitchell?" His voice was smooth as oil. "I know you're in there. We need to discuss your situation. State your business from there. Mr. Crane, I'm not receiving visitors." A low chuckle. "Come now, don't be unfriendly. We've ridden all this way to make you a generous offer. I told you in town, I'm not selling. Circumstances change." His voice hardened. "You have a baby now. Responsibilities. Wouldn't it be better to have money in hand? Enough to start fresh somewhere safe?" The emphasis on safe made Clara's skin crawl. "We're perfectly safe here." "Are you?" Footsteps on the porch. Multiple sets. Accidents happen in the wilderness. Fires, wild animals, Indian raids, a woman alone with an infant. Why, anything could happen. Clara's hands trembled as she raised the shotgun. "Get off my land." "Your land?" Crane's voice was closer now, right by the door. "Funny thing about land claims, papers can be lost, witnesses can forget. Did Thomas file everything properly before his unfortunate accident?" The door handle rattled. Clara's finger found the trigger. "I'll shoot." "No, you won't." But the rattling stopped. "You're a smart woman, Mrs. Mitchell." "Smart enough to know when you're outnumbered. We'll give you 3 days to reconsider. After that, well, winter's coming again. Be a shame if something happened to that woodpile, or the well, or..." A rifle shot cracked through the air. Clara heard men scrambling, cursing. Another shot. Closer this time. "That's far enough. Crane." Elias's voice, cold as winter iron. "You and your boys are leaving. Now. This isn't your business, mountain man. Made it my business when you threatened a woman and child. Don't make me tell you twice." Clara heard low conversation. Then Crane's voice, tight with anger. "This isn't over. The law." "The law's a day's ride away. I'm right here." Another rifle shot. This one clipping the ground near the horses. The animals danced nervously. "Get!" The sound of mounting, horses wheeling. Crane's parting words. 3 days, Mrs. Mitchell. Think of your daughter." Clara stayed frozen until the hoofbeats faded. Only then did she lower the shotgun, her arms shaking so badly she nearly dropped it. The door opened, and Elias filled the frame, his face dark with fury. "You hurt?" "No." Her voice came out strangled. "Hope." "I heard her crying from the ridge. She's fine." He stepped inside, checking the windows, every line of his body radiating tension. "Pack what you need. You're coming with me." "I can't leave. This is our home." "This is a target." He turned to face her. "Those men aren't prospectors. Clara, they're claim jumpers, backed by money and lawyers. They want your land, and they'll take it one way or another. The law is whatever men like Crane pay it to be." His voice softened. "You can't protect Hope here, not alone." Clara looked around the cabin, at the bed where Thomas had died, where Hope had been born, at the meager possessions that comprised her entire world. Then she looked at her daughter, so small and vulnerable in her cradle. "Just until they leave," she said finally. "A few days." Elias nodded. "I'll help you pack." They worked quickly, gathering essentials, clothes, blankets, what little food she had. Elias rigged a sling for Clara to carry Hope against her chest, keeping both hands free as they prepared to leave. Clara took one last look around. "Thomas built this place," she said softly. "It was supposed to be our beginning. Sometimes endings and beginnings look the same. Elias shouldered her pack. Come on. We need to move before they decide to come back. The journey up the mountain was hard. Clara's body hadn't recovered from childbirth, and carrying Hope made every step an effort. But Elias was patient, stopping often, taking the pack when she faltered. By the time they reached his cabin, the sun was setting and Clara was trembling with exhaustion. Bed, Elias ordered, taking Hope so Clara could collapse. I'll heat some soup. Clara wanted to protest, to maintain some pretense of independence, but her body overruled her pride. She sank onto the bed, the same bed where she'd stayed during the storm, and closed her eyes. She woke to Hope's hungry cries and the smell of cooking. Elias had arranged a comfortable chair by the fire where she could nurse the baby. He busied himself at the stove, giving them privacy while staying close enough to help if needed. How did you know to come? Clara asked when Hope was settled. Saw their tracks this morning. 5 riders, moving with purpose. He brought her a bowl of stew. Figured they weren't coming for tea. They'll be back. Yes. He sat across from her, his rifle within easy reach. Question is what we do about it. Clara looked down at Hope, milk-drowsy and content. I won't let them drive us off. That land is her inheritance. Land's no good if you're not alive to claim it. His voice was harsh, but Clara heard the fear beneath it. These men, Clara. I've seen their type before. They take what they want and justify it later. Then what do I do? Run? Where would we go? Elias was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was carefully neutral. There's another option. Clara's heart stuttered. What kind of option? Marriage. He met her eyes steadily. A married woman has legal protection. A husband can defend what's his without questions being asked, and... He paused, seeming to struggle with the words. Hope needs a father, a name, protection. The fire crackled in the silence. Clara's mind raced. Marriage, to a man she'd known barely a month, a man with shadows in his past and gentleness in his hands. That's a big step to take for protection. Is it? His gaze dropped to Hope. I've been alone a long time. Clara, by choice. Mostly. Figured I didn't deserve. But these weeks, seeing you fight for everything, watching Hope come into the world. He rubbed his face, looking suddenly vulnerable. Maybe it's selfish, but I'm tired of being alone, and you need help. So it's a business arrangement. The words came out sharper than she intended. If that's what you want it to be. He stood abruptly, moving to the window. I'm not Thomas, not young or full of dreams, but I can keep you safe. Both of you. Give Hope a name, a future. That's worth something, isn't it? Clara studied his broad back, the tension in his shoulders, remembered his hands delivering her daughter, his voice in the darkness telling her she was strong enough. Thought of the way he'd looked at Hope, like she was a miracle in a world that had run short of them. And if I wanted more than a business arrangement? The words were barely a whisper. Elias turned slowly. In his eyes, she saw hope warring with fear, desire held in careful check. Then we'd see where the trail leads. No promises except to try, to be honest with each other, to put hope first, always. A soft knock interrupted whatever Clara might have said. Elias had his rifle in hand instantly, but the voice that called out was familiar. Elias, it's Ben Foster from town. Got news you need to hear. Elias opened the door cautiously. Ben stood there, hat in hand, snow dusting his shoulders. Clara recognized him, one of the few townspeople who'd ever been kind to her. Ma'am. He nodded to Clara, then turned to Elias. Thought you should know. Crane's been to the land office. He's filing papers, saying the Mitchell claim was never properly recorded. Says he has prior rights from an old survey. That's a lie, Clara said hotly. Thomas filed everything properly. Maybe so, but the clerk's saying different now. Crane's money speaks louder than truth. Ben shifted uncomfortably. There's more. He's put out word. Any man helps the widow gets the same treatment. Already burned out the tailors for selling her supplies last month. Clara's hand flew to her mouth. The tailors? Are they? They got out safe, but they're barn's ashes. Ben looked between them. Judge is coming through in 2 days. Crane's pushing to have the claim decided then. Unless... He hesitated. Unless what? Elias prompted. Unless Mrs. Mitchell has legal representation, a husband to speak for her in court. Judge Hartwell's old-fashioned that way. Doesn't hold with widows trying to manage property alone. The cabin fell silent except for Hope's soft breathing. Clara felt the walls closing in, choices narrowing to a single path. Thank you, Ben, Elias said quietly. We'll think on it. After Ben left, Clara sat staring into the fire. 2 days. In 2 days, she could lose everything. Or... Yes, she said suddenly. Elias looked at her. Yes. Yes, I'll marry you. She lifted her chin, meeting his gaze squarely. For Hope, for the land, for whatever comes after. Something shifted in his face, walls coming down just a fraction. You're sure? I'm sure of very little anymore. Clara shifted Hope to her other arm. But I'm sure that you're a good man, that you'll keep us safe, that maybe we could build something real, given time. Elias crossed to her, knelt by the chair so they were eye level. I'm not an easy man. Clara, the war left marks that don't show. There'll be nights I can't sleep, days I can't talk about. Can you live with that? She thought of her own marks. Thomas's dreams turned to dust, the weight of survival, the fear that never quite left. We've all got scars. Maybe that means we'll understand each other better. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull back, and touched Hope's downy head. Then his hand covered Clara's where it rested on the baby. All right then, he said softly. We'll go to town tomorrow. Find the preacher. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Crane's going to be mighty surprised when the judge asks for Mrs. Tanner instead of Mrs. Mitchell. That night, they sat by the fire planning. It was strange, Clara thought, discussing marriage like a military campaign. But perhaps that's what it was. A strategic alliance against the forces trying to tear them down. As Hope slept between them in her makeshift cradle, Clara stole glances at the man who would tomorrow become her husband. Not the husband she'd dreamed of as a girl, not the one she'd chosen for love. But maybe, in this harsh land where survival itself was a victory, this was its own kind of love, the kind forged in necessity and hardship, tempered by mutual need. Elias, she said, as the fire burned low. That first day, when you found me in the snow, you could have left me there. Why didn't you? He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, because I saw myself in you. The stubbornness, the pride, the way you'd rather die than bend. He looked at her across the dying flames. And because even then, something in me recognized something in you. Like calling to maybe. Clara felt warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. Tomorrow would bring new battles, new challenges. But tonight, in this cabin carved out of wilderness and will, she felt something she hadn't experienced since Thomas died. Not alone. For the first time in months, she was not alone. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and cold. Clara stood before the small mirror in Elias's cabin, trying to make herself presentable with what little she had. Her best dress, the one she'd worn to marry Thomas, hung loose now, her body changed by pregnancy and hardship. But she pinned her hair carefully, pinched color into her cheeks, and tried not to think about how different this was from her first wedding day. Ready? Elias appeared in the doorway, dressed in what must be his best clothes. A clean shirt, dark pants, boots polished to a shine. He'd trimmed his beard and combed his hair back, revealing more of the strong planes of his face. He looked younger, Clara thought, and somehow more vulnerable. As ready as I can be. She lifted Hope from her cradle, wrapping her in the softest blanket they had. Are you certain about this? Once it's done, you'll be safe, both of you. He crossed to her, standing close enough that she could smell soap and leather. That's what matters. They made the journey to town in Elias's wagon, Hope cradled between them. Few words passed between them, but Clara was aware of every shift of his body, every glance he stole in her direction. This man would be her husband before the sun reached its peak. The thought made her stomach flutter with nerves and something else, anticipation, maybe, or hope. The church sat at the edge of town, weathered white paint peeling from its boards. Reverend Wilson met them at the door, his kind face creased with concern. "Elias, Mrs. Mitchell." He glanced between them. "Ben Foster said you'd be coming." "Are you certain about this? Marriage is a sacred bond, not to be entered lightly." "We're certain," Elias said firmly. "Will you perform the ceremony or not?" The Reverend sighed. "I will, though I wish it were under happier circumstances. Come inside." The church was empty save for Ben Foster and his wife Mary, who'd agreed to serve as witnesses. Mary immediately cooed over Hope, offering to hold her during the ceremony. Clara surrendered her daughter reluctantly, feeling strangely bereft without the warm weight in her arms. They stood before the simple altar, winter light filtering through plain glass windows. Clara was acutely aware of Elias beside her, his height, his solid presence, the way his hand engulfed hers when the Reverend instructed them to join hands. "Dearly beloved," Reverend Wilson began, and Clara felt the words wash over her like water. "Love, honor, cherish, in sickness and in health, until death do us part." When it came time for her vows, Clara's voice was steady. "I do." Elias's response was rougher, emotion threading through the simple words. "I do. I now pronounce you man and wife." The Reverend paused. "You may kiss your bride." Elias turned to her, and Clara saw uncertainty flash in his eyes, slowly, giving her time to pull away. He leaned down. The kiss was gentle, barely a brush of lips, but Clara felt it like a brand, a claiming, a promise. "Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Tanner," the Reverend said, and Clara startled at her new name. They signed the register, making it official. As they prepared to leave, Ben pulled Elias aside. "Crane's at the hotel, gathering more men. Word is he's planning something for tomorrow when the judge arrives. You'd best be ready." Elias nodded grimly. "We will be." Outside the church, Clara expected Elias to head back to the mountain. Instead, he turned the wagon toward the main street. "Where are we going?" "Shopping." At her surprised look, he almost smiled. "You're my wife now. That means providing for you proper. You need supplies, clothes that fit, things for Hope." "Elias, we can't afford—" "Let me worry about what we can afford." He pulled up outside Henderson's store. "Come on." What followed was the strangest shopping trip of Clara's life. Elias was methodical, selecting practical items, warm clothes, sturdy boots, fabric for baby clothes. But there were surprises too. A blue dress that brought out her eyes, a warm cloak with a real fur lining, a silver brush and mirror set. "This is too much," Clara protested when he added a rocking cradle to their purchases. "Hope needs a proper bed." His tone brooked no argument. "And you need a wedding present." He pulled out a small box, pressing it into her hands. Inside lay a simple gold ring, worn smooth with age. It was Sarah's, he said quietly. Kept it all these years, not sure why, maybe waiting for this. He took the ring, sliding it onto Clara's finger. It fit perfectly. "If you'd rather have something new—" "No." Clara closed her hand, feeling the weight of the ring, the history in it. "It's perfect, thank you." They were loading their purchases when Crane appeared, flanked by his men. The street seemed to quiet around them, townspeople sensing trouble. Well, heard congratulations are in order." Crane's smile was sharp as a blade. "Married the mountain man, did you? How convenient." "Nothing convenient about it," Elias said calmly, continuing to load the wagon. "Man sees something worth having. He'd be a fool not to claim it." "Indeed." Crane stepped closer. "Course, marriage doesn't change facts. That land still belongs to whoever has the right papers. And I've got papers. Forged papers." Clara found her voice, anger overcoming fear. Thomas filed everything properly. Prove it. Crane's pale eyes glittered. Oh, wait, you can't. Seems the original documents have gone missing from the land office. Terrible how careless clerks can be. Elias finished loading and helped Clara onto the wagon seat. Only then did he face Crane fully. See you in court tomorrow. Looking forward to it. Crane touched his hat mockingly. Enjoy your wedding night, Mrs. Tanner. Might be your last in these parts. The ride back to the mountain was tense. Clara could feel Elias's anger radiating from him like heat from a forge. Hope fussed, picking up on the adult's mood. He destroyed Thomas's papers. Clara said, We can't prove anything now. We'll see about that. Elias's jaw was tight. Man like Crane makes enemies. Someone will talk. Back at the cabin, they unloaded in silence. The reality of their situation settled over Clara like a weight. She was married again, to a man she barely knew, and tomorrow they'd fight for land that might already be lost. As evening fell, an awkwardness descended. They moved around each other carefully, hyper-aware of the change in their relationship. When hope finally settled for the night, Clara found herself alone with her new husband, unsure what came next. I'll sleep by the fire, Elias said, reading her uncertainty. Nothing's changed except what needs to for legal protection. Clara felt both relief and something like disappointment. This is your bed. I couldn't. You could and you will. He gathered blankets, making himself a pallet near the hearth. You've been through enough. You need proper rest. Clara retreated to the bedroom, but sleep wouldn't come. Through the door, she could hear Elias moving about, stoking the fire, the quiet sounds of a man settling for the night. Her husband. The word felt foreign on her tongue. Near midnight, Hope woke hungry. Clara fed her in the rocking chair, humming softly. When she emerged to warm some water for tea, she found Elias sitting up, staring into the flames. Couldn't sleep either, she asked. Don't sleep much anymore. He shifted, making room for her near the fire. Too many ghosts. Clara settled beside him, Hope drowsy in her arms. Tell me about her, Sarah. Elias was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, met her at a church social in Denver. Tiny little thing, barely came to my shoulder. But fierce. Lord, she was fierce. Told me straight out I needed civilizing. A sad smile touched his lips. She was probably right. You loved her very much. I did. Thought that would be enough to keep her safe. His voice roughened. I was wrong. Clara reached out instinctively, touching his hand. He turned it palm up, lacing their fingers together. What about Thomas? He asked. You loved him? I thought I did. Maybe I loved who he could have been, given time. Clara looked down at Hope. He was full of dreams. I mistook that for strength, but dreams don't keep you warm in winter. They sat in companionable silence, hands linked, watching the fire die to embers. Finally, Elias spoke. I meant what I said earlier, about this marriage. We'll take it slow, build something real if we can. But Clara, he turned to face her. I need you to know what I feel for you. It's not convenience, not just protection. When I saw you in that snowdrift, when I watched you fight for every breath bringing hope into the world, you woke something in me I thought was dead. Clara's heart raced. Elias, I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give. Just wanted you to know where I stand. He squeezed her hand gently. We've got time now. All the time we need. The next morning came too soon. They dressed carefully. Clara in her new blue dress. Elias in his wedding clothes again. Hope wore a tiny gown Clara had sewn from leftover fabric, looking like a small angel. The courthouse was packed. Word had spread about the confrontation, and it seemed half the county had come to watch. Crane sat at the plaintiff's table with a well-dressed lawyer from Denver. His men lined the back wall, a silent threat. Judge Hartwell, ancient and stern, called the court to order. We're here to determine the rightful owner of the mining claim known as Mitchell's Stake, Mr. Crane. Present your case. The lawyer stood, smooth as silk, He presented papers, surveys, testimonies from mysteriously absent witnesses. It was a masterful performance, painting Thomas as a claim jumper who'd never properly filed. Crane, as the rightful owner, finally come to claim his due. When he finished, the judge turned to their table. "And who speaks for the defense?" Elias stood. "I do. Elias Tanner, speaking for my wife's interests." "Your wife?" The judge peered over his spectacles. "I understood this was the Mitchell claim." "Was, Your Honor. Clara Mitchell is now Clara Tanner. We were married yesterday." Elias produced their marriage certificate. "The claim is now jointly held." Crane's lawyer jumped up. "This is clearly a sham marriage, designed to—" "Careful, counselor." The judge's voice was sharp. "Attacking the sanctity of marriage in my courtroom is ill-advised. Continue, Mr. Tanner." Elias laid out their case simply. Thomas's faithful work on the claim. His death in the mine. Clara's continued residence and improvement of the land, but without papers. It was their word against Crane's documents. "If I may, Your Honor." A new voice from the back of the room. Clara turned to see Mrs. Henderson making her way forward, clutching a leather portfolio. "I have something the court needs to see." "And you are?" "Martha Henderson. My husband runs the general store." She shot a defiant look at Crane. "I kept the books for my husband, and I'm tired of seeing good people driven out by lies." She opened the portfolio, revealing papers Clara recognized. Thomas's original claim documents. "Thomas Mitchell gave these to my husband for safekeeping." Mrs. Henderson continued, "Asked us to put them in our safe. My husband was persuaded to say they were lost, but I couldn't stand by and watch this travesty." The courtroom erupted. Crane's lawyer objected. Crane himself shot to his feet, and the judge hammered for order. When quiet was restored, Judge Hartwell examined the papers carefully. "These appear to be in order. Mr. Crane, your claim is rejected. The land belongs to Mrs. Tanner." He fixed Crane with a stern look. "I suggest you and your associates leave this county today." As the crowd dispersed, Clara caught Mrs. Henderson's arm. "Why, after the way you treated me?" The older woman's face was tired. "I was wrong. Fear makes fools of us all. When I heard what Crane did to the Taylors, what he planned for you, sometimes you have to choose between being safe and being right." Outside the courthouse, Crane waited by their wagon, his men behind him. Elias stepped protectively in front of Clara and Hope. "This isn't over," Crane said quietly. "Papers or no papers. Accidents happen. Fires start. Men disappear in the mountains." "Yes, they do." Elias's voice was deadly calm. "Which is why you're leaving. Now. Tonight. Because if you're still in this county come dawn, or if anything happens to my family, ever, well, like you said, men disappear in the mountains." Something in Elias's eyes must have convinced him. Crane stepped back, gesturing to his men. "You've made a powerful enemy today. Wouldn't be the first time." Elias helped Clara into the wagon. "Won't be the last." As they drove away, Clara looked back at the town that had rejected her, then saved her, at the mountains rising beyond, promising hard winters and uncertain springs, at the man beside her, her husband now, as much a mystery as the land itself. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" "For standing with us, for fighting for us. For—" She touched her wedding ring. "For everything." Elias reached over, covering her hand with his. "We're family now. Family stands together." As they climbed toward home, their home, Clara felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Not just hope, but certainty. The road ahead was uncertain, full of challenges she couldn't foresee, but she wouldn't walk it alone, in her arms. Hope cooed contentedly, and beside her, Elias began to hum an old tune she almost recognized. The mountains stood eternal around them, and Clara Tanner faced forward, ready for whatever came next. 2 weeks passed in relative peace. Clara had begun to believe Crane's threats were empty, that the law had finally prevailed. She and Elias settled into a careful rhythm of shared domesticity. He taught her to track deer. She mended his clothes. He built a proper cradle for Hope. She cooked meals that seemed to ease some of the shadows in his eyes. They still kept separate sleeping arrangements. But the awkwardness was fading, replaced by something warmer. Sometimes Clara caught Elias watching her with an expression that made her pulse quicken. Sometimes she found herself studying the way his hands moved when he worked, remembering their gentleness during Hope's birth. The attack came at dawn. Clara woke to the smell of smoke and Elias shaking her roughly. "Get up! Get Hope! Now!" Through the window, she could see orange flames licking at the woodshed. Men's voices carried on the wind, drunk on whiskey and violence. "Crane!" she gasped, snatching Hope from her cradle. "His men, 6, maybe 7. Elias was already dressed, checking his rifle. They torched the shed, probably hoping to drive us out. "Stay here. Guard the door. Elias, no!" But he was gone, melting into the pre-dawn darkness like smoke. Clara heard the crack of his rifle, a man's scream, answering gunfire. Hope wailed, sensing the danger. Clara tried to soothe her daughter while watching through the window. Shadows moved between the trees. Too many shadows. A figure approached the cabin, and Clara raised the shotgun. But it was only Ben Foster, bloody and limping. "Let me in," he gasped. "Came to warn you. Too late." Clara unbarred the door, pulling him inside. "You're hurt. Just a graze." He slumped against the wall. "Heard them planning in town. Rode hard, but they had a head start." Another rifle crack. Closer this time. Clara saw Elias duck behind the well housing as bullets splintered the wood around him. He was outnumbered, and they were closing in. "Watch Hope," Clara said, thrusting the baby into Ben's arms. "What are you?" Clara was already moving. She slipped out the back door, shotgun in hand, circling through the shadows. The men were focused on Elias, not expecting danger from behind. She saw her chance when 2 of them moved to flank Elias's position. Clara stepped from cover, shotgun steady. "Drop your weapons." They spun, surprised. One started to raise his pistol. Clara fired, the buckshot taking him in the shoulder, spinning him to the ground. The second man dove for cover as Clara pumped the shotgun, chambering another round. The distraction was enough. Elias erupted from behind the well, rifle thundering. Another attacker fell. The rest scattered, suddenly outmaneuvered. "The cabin!" someone shouted. "Burn them out!" Clara ran, hearing boots pounding behind her. She burst through the door, slamming it shut, dropping the bar into place. Seconds later, something heavy hit the wood. "They're surrounding us," Ben said, pale but determined. He'd found Thomas's old pistol, held it ready with his good arm. Elias appeared at the window, blood streaming from a cut on his forehead. "How many rounds you got?" 3 shells left," Clara reported. "Maybe 10 bullets for the pistol." "Not enough." Elias's face was grim. "They'll try to burn us out. We need—" A new sound cut through the morning. Hoofbeats. Many hoofbeats. Clara peered through the gun port Elias had insisted on cutting in the door. "Riders," she breathed. "A dozen or more. Crane bringing reinforcements," Ben said bitterly. But the voices that rang out weren't what they expected. "This is Sheriff Morrison from Cheyenne. Throw down your weapons, all of you, or we'll cut you down where you stand." Clara sagged with relief. Through the window, she could see uniformed men surrounding Crane's thugs. The attack was over as suddenly as it had begun. An hour later, they sat in the ruins of normalcy. The sheriff had taken Crane's men, but not before Clara learned the truth. Crane himself was nowhere to be found, fled in the night, leaving his hired guns to face justice alone. "We've been tracking this bunch for weeks," Sheriff Morrison explained. "Train robbery outside Laramie. Crane was just a name they used. The real Josiah Crane died 2 years ago in California." "So it was never about the mine?" Clara asked, hope fretful in her arms. "Oh, they'd have taken it if they could. But when the legal route failed," the sheriff shrugged. "Men like that don't like being told no. After the sheriff left with his prisoners, Clara surveyed the damage. The woodshed was gone, reduced to smoking timbers. Bullet holes scarred the cabin walls, and Elias, she found him by the burned shed, staring at the ashes. "We could have lost everything," he said quietly. "I should have seen this coming. Should have protected you better. You did protect us." Clara touched his arm. "We're alive. That's what matters." He turned to her, and she saw something raw in his eyes. "When I heard that first shot, when I thought they might get past me to you and Hope," his hand cupped her face, thumb brushing her cheek. "I can't lose anyone else. Clara, I can't." "You won't." She leaned into his touch. "We're here. We're safe." "Are we?" He gestured at the damage. This was just hired thugs. What happens when someone smarter comes along? Someone who wants the land bad enough to… Clara silenced him by rising on her toes and pressing her lips to his. For a moment he froze. Then his arms came around her, pulling her against him. This kiss was nothing like their wedding day. It was desperate, needful, full of fear transformed into something fiercer. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Clara kept her hands fisted in his shirt. "We survived. Together. That's what we do now. Face things together." That night, for the first time, Elias didn't make his pallet by the fire. When Clara emerged from settling Hope, she found him standing uncertainly by the bedroom door. "I thought, if you're willing, I'd like to stay close tonight, in case there's more trouble." Clara understood what he wasn't saying, that the attack had shaken him, that he needed the reassurance of their presence as much as they might need his protection. "Yes," she said simply, taking his hand. They lay carefully apart at first, the bed suddenly seeming too small. But when Hope cried in the night, they moved together naturally, Clara nursing the baby while Elias kept an arm around them both, a living shield against the darkness. Over the following days, they worked to repair the damage. Ben Foster returned with supplies and news from town. The fake Crane's capture had emboldened others to speak out about intimidation and extortion. A cleanup was underway, corrupt officials being replaced. "Folks are saying you two are heroes," Ben reported, helping Elias frame the new woodshed. "Standing up to those outlaws." "We're not heroes," Elias said flatly. "Just people defending what's ours." But Clara noticed the change in how the townspeople treated them. Nods of respect instead of suspicious looks, offers of help instead of cold shoulders. Even Mrs. Henderson sent a basket of preserves with an apology note. As autumn deepened, their relationship deepened with it. The careful distance dissolved into something warmer, more natural. Clara would find herself seeking excuses to touch Elias, straightening his collar, brushing sawdust from his hair. He began reaching for her just as easily, a hand on her back as he passed, fingers interlacing with hers as they sat by the fire. One evening, as early snow dusted the mountains, Clara was darning socks while Elias cleaned his rifle. Hope slept peacefully in her cradle, making the soft sounds that still filled Clara with wonder. "I've been thinking," Elias said suddenly, "about the claim." Clara looked up, needle pausing. "What about it?" Thomas was right. There are signs of silver in those hills. Nothing big, maybe, but enough. He set the rifle aside. "Come spring, I could work it, properly, safely. Build us that fine house he promised you." "I don't need a fine house." Clara set down her sewing. "I have everything I need. Do you?" He studied her intently. "This isn't the life you planned. Clara, married to a broken-down soldier, living rough in the mountains." Clara rose, crossing to where he sat. She settled onto his lap, feeling him tense in surprise before his arms came around her. "Thomas sold me dreams," she said softly. "Pretty pictures of a future that never came. You gave me reality, safety, partnership, hope for tomorrow." She touched his face, feeling the rasp of stubble. "I'll take truth over dreams any day." He caught her hand, pressing it to his lips. "Even if the truth is that I wake up screaming sometimes, that there are days I can barely speak for the weight of what I've done. Even then." Clara leaned her forehead against his. We all have our darkness, Elias, but we also have this, each other. Hope, a life we're building together. That's enough light to see by. He kissed her then, slow and deep, and Clara felt the last walls between them crumble when he carried her to their bed, when he loved her with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes. She understood that they had crossed a threshold, no longer a marriage of convenience, but something real, something worth fighting for. Later, as they lay entwined, Elias spoke into the darkness. I love you. Should have said it sooner, but the words, they don't come easy anymore. I know. Clara pressed closer to his warmth. I love you too. Not the way I thought I loved Thomas, all flash and fever. This is different, deeper, like mountain roots. He chuckled softly. Mountain roots. I like that. Outside, wind howled through the peaks, winter asserting its dominion, but inside the cabin, wrapped in each other's arms. Clara and Elias had found their own season, a spring of second chances, growing strong despite the cold. When hope woke near dawn, they tended to her together, a family forged not by blood or easy choices, but by courage, necessity, and the gradual recognition of home in each other's eyes. The land might draw more trouble, the winters would always be harsh, and the ghosts of their pasts would never fully fade. But as the sun painted the mountains gold and rose, as hope gurgled contentedly between them, Clara knew with bone-deep certainty that they would endure. They had survived the worst that men and nature could offer. Whatever came next, they would face it as they had learned to face everything, together, without flinching, with love as their anchor and the mountains as their witness. The cabin stood solid against the morning light, smoke rising straight and true from the chimney, a signal to the world that here, in this unlikely place, something beautiful had taken root and refused to be moved. Winter melted into spring like a miracle unfolding. The snow retreated up the mountainsides, revealing tender green shoots that seemed impossible after such harsh cold. Clara stood in the doorway of their expanded cabin. Elias had added a room over the winter, watching Hope take wobbling steps across the porch. Careful, little one, she called as Hope reached for a butterfly. Elias emerged from the tree line, rifle over his shoulder and a string of rabbits in his hand. He'd been gone since dawn, but his face lit up when he saw them. The shadows that had haunted his eyes were still there, but softer now, held at bay by purpose and belonging. She's walking everywhere now, Clara said as he climbed the steps. Yesterday she made it all the way to the well. Getting too big too fast? He set down his hunt, scooping Hope into his arms. She squealed with delight, patting his bearded face with chubby hands. Pretty soon she'll be running these hills wild as a deer. Clara watched them together, her husband and daughter, though Thomas's blood ran in Hope's veins. But blood, she'd learned, was only the beginning of family. The rest was built day by day, choice by choice. In moments like these, the Fosters are coming for dinner, she reminded him. Mary's bringing her famous apple cake. Good, got something to tell Ben. Elias set Hope down, his expression growing serious. Found sign up on the ridge. Someone's been camping there, watching the valley. Clara's hand went to her throat. You think it's... Don't know, but we'll be ready either way. He touched her cheek gently. Nothing's going to happen to you, either of you, I promise. That evening, as they sat around the table with Ben and Mary Foster, Clara felt the warmth of community wrapping around them like a quilt. Ben bounced Hope on his knee while Mary helped Clara clear the dishes, and the men talked about plans for a proper road up to the claim. Could make hauling easier, Ben was saying. If you do find silver up there, not looking for a fortune. Elias replied. Just enough to build a good life, maybe add a barn, some livestock, give Hope something solid to inherit. Speaking of inheriting, Mary said with a knowing smile, her hand resting on her own stomach. Seems Hope might have a playmate come autumn. The women embraced while the men shook hands, and Clara felt her eyes mist. A year ago she'd been alone, starving, Sure, she and her unborn child would vanish into the mountain snow like so many others. Now she had family, friends, a future stretching ahead like the valley below their cabin. After the Fosters left, Elias checked the shutters and barred the door, habits that would never fully fade. Clara was nursing Hope by the fire when he sat beside them, his arm settling around her shoulders. "About that sign I found," he said quietly. "I'm riding to town tomorrow. Talk to the sheriff. Want you to stay inside. Keep the shotgun handy. You think someone's planning something? I think we've learned not to take chances." He watched Hope's eyes flutter closed, milk drowsy and content. "We've got too much to lose now." Clara leaned into his warmth. "Then we'll be careful, but we won't live in fear. That's not the life I want for her." "No," he agreed. "She deserves better than that." The next day passed peacefully. Clara worked in her kitchen garden, another of Elias's additions, while Hope napped in a basket nearby. The sun was warm on her shoulders, the earth rich between her fingers. She was planting beans when she heard horses approaching. Her hand found the pistol in her apron pocket. Elias had insisted she carry it, but it was only the sheriff, with Elias and another man she didn't recognize. Mrs. Tanner. Sheriff Morrison tipped his hat. "This here's James Crawford from the territorial government. He's got some news might interest you." They gathered in the cabin, Hope playing at Clara's feet while Mr. Crawford explained. The government was offering to buy mineral rights to certain claims, including theirs, for the railroad expansion. "It's a fair price," Crawford said, sliding papers across the table. "Enough to set you up comfortable. You'd keep the land itself. Just sell the mining rights." Clara looked at Elias. They discussed this possibility through the winter, whether to work the claim themselves or find another way. "What do you think?" she asked. Elias studied the papers. "It's good money, enough to build proper, maybe buy some bottom land for farming." He met her eyes. "But it's your call." This was Thomas's dream first. Clara thought of Thomas, his fevered certainty that fortune waited in the rock. But she also thought of the mine that had killed him, of men driven mad by gold fever, of the violence that followed wherever precious metal was found. "Thomas dreamed of riches," she said slowly. "But what he really wanted was a good life for his family. This gives us that without the risk." She turned to Crawford. "We'll take your offer." As summer ripened into autumn, changes came swiftly. The government money allowed them to build a proper house, not a mansion, but solid and warm, with real glass windows and a stone foundation that would last generations. They bought cattle, hired Ben Foster to help work the land, and watched their small corner of the world transform from a survival camp into a thriving homestead. Clara stood in her new kitchen, kneading bread while Hope played with wooden blocks Elias had carved. Through the window, she could see him working with Ben, raising the frame of a barn. His movements were strong and sure, a man in his element. "Mama," Hope said, holding up a block. "Papa?" "Yes, sweet girl, that's Papa." The word still sent warmth through Clara's chest. Hope had chosen it herself, her child's heart recognizing what biology couldn't provide. That evening, as they sat on their new porch watching the sun paint the mountains gold, Elias took her hand. "No regrets?" he asked. "About the silver?" "None." Clara squeezed his fingers. "We have everything we need. A home, friends, each other. Hope has a future now. A real one. And maybe a brother or sister soon." There was hope in his voice, carefully contained. Clara smiled, moving his hand to her stomach. "Maybe sooner than you think." The joy that broke across his face was like sunrise after a long night. He pulled her close, pressing kisses to her hair, while Hope climbed into their laps, demanding attention. As darkness settled over the valley, they moved inside their sturdy home. The fire crackled warmly, keeping the mountain cold at bay. Hope dozed in her father's arms while Clara finished her sewing, and peace settled over them like a benediction. They'd traveled hard roads to reach this moment, through loss and fear, violence and desperation. But they'd also found strength in each other, love in unexpected places. and the courage to build something lasting from the ashes of old dreams. Outside, the mountains stood eternal guard, having witnessed their struggle and triumph. The land that had nearly broken them had become their salvation, teaching them that sometimes the greatest treasures weren't hidden in rock, but found in the simple grace of survival transformed into life. Clara looked at her family, her brave, broken, beautiful family, and knew that every hardship had been worth this moment. In the morning, there would be work to do, challenges to face, a life to continue building. But tonight, in the warmth of their home, with love surrounding them like fortress walls, they were complete. The mountains knew their secret now, that two wounded souls had found healing in each other's arms, that a child born of loss had become a bridge to joy, and that, in the wild heart of the West, the strongest treasures were the ones you chose to create together, day by day, season by season, until forever felt not like a promise but a certainty as solid as the earth beneath their feet. Thank you so much for listening to this story from the Wild West. I hope Clara and Elias's journey touched your heart as much as it touched mine. Where are you listening from today? I'd love to hear from listeners around the world. Please subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your stories and responses mean everything to us. Until next time, partners.